Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it is another mock draft. We're getting so close to the actual day. This one, we're going to have a couple of trades throughout it. Nothing really drastic. This is going to be a extremely predictive mock draft, and we're going to see where I think Jalen Carter in particular can fall to. I think that's the real focus of this particular mock and how his fall could cause a drastic ripple effect throughout the rest of the first round into the second round. We always do 2 rounds around here. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any. We're going to have a 7-round mock coming up, and then, of course, my deep dive series on each team will be coming out throughout the summer, so you don't want to miss that. Yeah, and thumbs up the video. Leave a comment in the comments section on what your thoughts are as you watch it. So let's get right to the picks. All right, so let's start here with the top 8 picks. We go 8 by 8, of course, as always. And we got CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. I think they're locked in number 1 and number 2 at this point. I'm not sure Anthony Richardson finds his way into the top 2. That's why I have the Colts taking him at 4. The Cardinals, I think they'll sit pretty at 3. Take Will Anderson Jr. and call it a day. Then the draft for me really starts here with Seattle. And this time I have him taking Tyree Wilson and passing on Jalen Carter. You can see Jalen Carter does make it out of the top 8. We'll get to where I have him going shortly. But I think Tyree Wilson really fits that versatility that defenses love to do now, which involves being able to play really anywhere across the defensive line. I think Tyree Wilson can really find his way in there, especially when you got Boye Mafe and Uchenna Nwosu, who are more traditional, smaller guys compared to Tyree Wilson. So you can have really a front 4 on passing downs that's Boye Mafe, Uchenna Nwosu, Draymond Jones, and Tyree Wilson. That's a fascinating front 4. And then, they have Devin Bush on a 1-year contract. They got Bobby Wagner on a 1-year contract. Jordan Brooks is going to be coming off of injury. Hopefully he plays next year. There's a lot of potential there for that front 7 in general, but that front 4, Tyree Wilson, I think adds a lot to it. And also I think on early downs, it allows them to play a little bit bigger and let Boye Mafe sort of work his way in on those early downs, or alternate with Uchenna Nwosu. Maybe they want to play really big. And have Draymond Jones and Tyree Wilson be defensive ends in on first and second down. There's just a lot of possibilities there. And then we got back-to-back corners: Christian Gonzalez, Devin Witherspoon. Again, who's number 1? Cornerback 1, cornerback 2. I think it's a real toss-up. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that have, sort of like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, I think there's going to be a lot of teams that have different guys as their cornerback 1 and cornerback 2. And then Lucas Van Ness going to the Falcons. I can see this being a trade back perhaps, but there's not a lot of trades that happen in the top 10 of the draft unless it's for a quarterback. There really isn't. A quarterback, maybe a blue chip edge rusher, but there's teams up there that aren't going to be moving away to not draft those guys. So I don't really see as much action in this top 8, top 9, perhaps top 10, as people are expecting. And I think Lucas Van Ness, because he's a bigger player, I think he really fits more of what that defense is going to be wanting to do. And it's sort of the same argument with Tyree Wilson. You can play really big on early downs and then work in more of a true pass rushing group of 4 on third downs with Ebiketie, Van Ness, Grady Jarrett, Lorenzo Carter. So you can see I have 2 trades coming up, and I'll address the trades first. The Eagles are a prime trade down spot, and I got them trading down with for Tampa Bay to get Will Levis. This is going to be the Chicago Bears Giants trade value, where it's going to be a 3rd-round pick and an extra first, and then maybe like a late day 3 pick might go as well to Philadelphia, but that's the general sense of what they're going to be getting. So the Eagles are going to have 2 first-round picks again next year. Shout out to them. I think that's prime Philadelphia Eagles and how they've manipulated the draft board the last couple of years. And then I got Bijan Robinson going as the Chargers trade with the Patriots, who are always looking to trade down. And I think the Chargers can trade up. They'll also move on from Austin Eckler. Not in this trade. I think it'll be a separate trade, perhaps sometime during the draft, depending on what the value is of Austin Eckler. It could be a late day 2, early day 3 pick. So I think teams through the first 2 rounds may be looking to get a running back. If they miss out, I could see someone trying to go and get Austin Eckler that way. But we got Paris Johnson and Peter Skoronski, the 2 tackles, going to the Bears and the Titans. Broderick Jones going to the Jets. Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think it's screaming for that to happen with Green Bay. And then Joey Porter Jr., high character guy, going to Washington. And I'll address Jalen Carter falling to 12 to the Texans. Now, I could see this fall happening, especially with the Eagles trading out of that spot and valuing getting a first-round pick next year and feeling they can still field their needs and not have to risk adding a guy like Jalen Carter to their roster, even though it would be a free pick. There's just something, I think, interesting about the idea of Carter falling from that spot and then the Texans sitting there at 12 and being like, we got a quarterback. Could it be possible that if we get Bryce Young and Jalen Carter, we can somehow walk out with the 2 best players in this draft as long as everything goes according to potential? And I think getting Jalen Carter for DeMeco Ryans' defense, I think he would leap at that. And I also think because they had that 2nd overall pick already, this is a significantly less risky move for them, where they can take this upside and risk on a guy like Jalen Carter, who, his character is coming into play. His lack of performing at his workouts, the legal issues and whatever, the misdemeanors. I think that this is a good risk for Houston to take, and I think that their fan base, frankly, will forgive them if Jalen Carter turns out to be a bust, which I don't find to be very likely, but there is that potential that he might just not love it as much as his talent level would hopefully dictate he did. And then you can see the 2 teams that traded down in the previous slide. Eagles land Deonte Banks, a very physical corner, and I think that because they have so much depth at corner, Deonte Banks perhaps landing in Philly is actually going to be really good for him, because it will allow them to sort of work through that handsiness that he has, that aggressiveness that he has, that would usually get called penalties in the NFL. So you can help him dial that back with having all that experience around him, which I think would be very advantageous for them, and help him reach really what his full potential could be at the next level. And then Anton Harrison, tackle, going to the Patriots to pick up some extra draft capital there and still get an offensive tackle. Speaking of tackles, Darnell Wright going to the Steelers. Seems to be a perfect fit. Quentin Johnson going to the Lions. I am pretty much locked in on this happening, barring Jackson Smith-Njigba going before the Packers pick, and then the Packers maybe being in a position where they feel they have to take Quentin Johnston. But I love Quentin Johnston going to the Detroit Lions. I think it's going to be just wonderful. Chef's kiss. Seattle gets Jordan Addison. Nice speedy guy, good route runner to mix in with Lockett and DK Metcalf. Then Zay Flowers going there to Baltimore. The more I think about it, the more I feel like Baltimore and Lamar will figure it out. And then they'll get him a nice little wide receiver that can make plays underneath and across the middle of the field on some drag routes, get the ball in his hands early, let him do some stuff after the catch. And then Minnesota grabbing Brian Branch, defensive back, Alabama. They need to fix that secondary. I think you can play Brian Branch at cornerback early in his career, and then depending on what happens with your safeties group, you can play a triple safety thing there. Lewis Seen can come up and play. Harrison Smith can come up and play in the box. You can put Branch deep. There's a lot of versatility you can have there, and I think that Brian Flores, as a defensive coordinator, would really like having that versatility at his disposal. We do have 2 trade ups from early in the second round into the first round here. And I'll start with Houston trading up with the Giants so they can grab Myles Murphy. Myles Murphy did wonders for his draft stock at his pro day. I think he solidified himself as a first-round pick. It's just a matter of how the board's going to fall will determine where he goes. And then ironically, same thing goes for Nolan Smith, who the Rams trade up for with the Buffalo Bills in order to grab him. So I think that those 2 guys are in this weird spot now. Like they're in a group sort of with each other. I see Tyree Wilson sort of being that second guy with Will Anderson being the first. Lucas Van Ness is almost solidified as the third. And then you got Myles Murphy and Nolan Smith sort of sitting there together as a group. I think depending on how they fit within a system will determine where they go. And in Houston coming up, I think Murphy will fit a lot better. So now, Houston, you've gotten Myles Murphy, Jalen Carter, and Bryce Young, who, frankly, a couple months ago were looked at as all top 10 picks. So congratulations on that. I think Houston Texan fans would really love if this was their real draft. And Nolan Smith coming up for the Rams, they need to get something going on in that defense. Their defense is god-awful. I said this in the last video. Their defense is brutally terrible. So go get something on that defense. And Nolan Smith, he can play a variety of different spots. Sort of like, I'm not going to say he's Micah Parsons, but he's that type of player. With that type of skill set. Like a Micah Parsons, Hassan Reddick type of a guy. Osiris Torrance going to the Jags. Just a big mauler investing in Trevor Lawrence a little bit further, especially because, Branch is off the board. So you can maybe look at adding on the defensive side a little bit later. The interior offensive line class is not very deep. So you might be better just get the top guy and then worry about getting corners, safeties, whatever in that second and third round. Michael Mayer and Dalton Kincaid, the 2 first-round tight ends. I think the Cowboys would like Mayer's blocking ability that Kincaid just doesn't have. I think that's going to put Mayer over the top come the actual draft day. But then Kincaid, I don't think the Bengals will be too upset about him being the guy that they land. Then we got to run on some interior defensive linemen. Brian Breeze and Kalijah Cansey. I could see them sort of like Myles Murphy and Nolan Smith. Sort of, they're in that group together. But I think Brian Breezy will get picked before Cansey just because I think teams the size and the length will scare off some teams. I think the Eagles are in a position to take a chance on that, more so than the Saints are. And then DeJuan Jones, absolute beast, going to the Chiefs to help complete that offensive line that saw their 2 tackles from just the Super Bowl both leave to free agency. They've replaced them now with Jawan Taylor and DeJuan Jones. Getting here in the second round, we'll talk about the 2 trade backs. The Giants trade back. They get John Michael Schmitz, the center, out of Minnesota while acquiring an extra pick. Don't really know what the trade value is in that. I kind of thought that the Giants would get a third while giving up a fourth. I did the same thing with Buffalo and the Rams. Buffalo trades back. Get Jahmyr Gibbs. Maybe running back's not the biggest need for them, but now you've added in a guy who could be maybe a more permanent alpha while having Damian Harris and James Cook sort of being the spells for him throughout games, depending on the situation. Mozzie Smith going to the Cardinals. Got Jalen Hyatt going to the Colts. A great third guy to have in there. And with Anthony Richardson, you got a big arm, so why not get all that speed to really take advantage of that big arm over the years. Keely Ringo, he is a corner. I've heard teams are seeing him as a safety. So I think that him going to Seattle, I think they figure out the best way to really use him to the best of his abilities. They've done a great job with guys that at the cornerback position, specifically Tariq Woolen and Kobe Bryant, who were seen as sort of in the same light as a Keely Ringo in that they needed to be put in the proper positions in the proper scheme, and I think Ringo's height, his length, will really help him come along. And being the number 2 guy out there with Woolen, maybe even having to be a third corner early on with they brought back Michael Jackson, who had a pretty good year. So, work him in there. Then we got Adeto Adebayor, who's going to be that 3-4 defensive end to complement Max Crosby and Chandler Jones in the I forget his name. He was the Giants guy. Patrick Graham's defense. He'll be that Leonard Williams type role, and Leonard Williams had a great run under Patrick Graham as a defensive coordinator. I think Adebayor will fill that role in this defense. Then we got Keon White going to the Panthers. The Saints add another defensive lineman. This one, the explosiveness of Will McDonald off the edge. So now you've figured out the interior and the edge group for the long term. Darnell Washington to the Titans helps with the run identity and is still an effective tight end in the passing game. Then we got the Aaron Rodgers trade that's for sure going to involve the 43rd pick in the draft. And they're going to grab Daniel Scott, who I have quite high on my board just because he seems to be the best suited to be that single high deep safety. And with they have Darnell Savage, who's sort of playing more in the slot role and stuff, I think having Daniel Scott in that deep safety role is the best place for him to be. I think Green Bay will be able to use him as in that role quite effectively based upon who else they have playing safety currently on the roster. They also grabbed Luke Musgrave there, the tight end. Drew Sanders going to the Jets. He can provide some blitzing. He can provide a variety of usages. Not quite the Fred Warner type that they might be wanting eventually. But I think bringing in Drew Sanders is a good complement to C.J. Mosley. Emmanuel Forbes, cornerback to the Falcons. I think this is a good spot for them. You add Forbes, you got Lucas Van Ness. It's good, really good for the defense and the pass defense in particular. Josh Downs going to the Patriots. Just give them something, some boost, some oomph. I've heard people say juice. I'll use the word juice too. Give that offense some juice. And then Jack Campbell going to Washington, the linebacker. Great leadership skills, and he seems to be the surest bet as a pure off-ball linebacker. Let's talk about the Lions, who have 2 picks in this grouping. Steve Avila will come in, be that 4th interior offensive lineman. Eventually, you hope takes over at guard while he works on his run blocking. And then Trenton Simpson, the linebacker out of Clemson. Really versatile. I think that Aaron Glenn would really like to have a player like him on that defense to be a more long-term starting linebacker for them. Then you got Felix Anudike going to the Steelers. Matthew Bergeron goes to the Bucks, which leaves the Miami Dolphins to take Cody Mock, where get the best 5 guys on the field. For Miami, I'm sure they would prefer Bergeron, but I think getting Cody Mock, he is a tackle, likely a guard at the next level. But I think you can play around with him and put him in the best position to succeed. B.J. Ojolari, edge rusher. They don't really have anyone playing the edge for the Bears. I could see them addressing the edge position and the interior defensive line position multiple times during this draft. Keanu Benton, defensive tackle to the Chargers, help out with that horrific run defense. Hopefully he can help out with that. And then Hendon Hooker, you see there at 53 with Seattle. This is the perfect situation for him to end up in. A team that's he can redshirt for anyway because he's going to be injured. But he sits in a situation where it's not necessarily guaranteed that come his sophomore year, he won't be the starter. Or he won't be given an opportunity to compete for that starting role because, yes, you have Geno Smith, who's literally had one good season his entire career, which was last year. History tells you Geno Smith is a replacement level quarterback. So you pay Geno. Geno gets this whole year coming up to prove that he is the guy that you thought he was when you paid him. But you also now have Hendon Hooker, who can sit in the film room, learn, continue to develop, and then maybe next year, if Geno Smith is or Hendon Hooker overly impresses, then you got a really good problem of having two good quarterbacks, and you might be able to get something for Geno Smith. We get quite the run on defensive backs here, with Clark Phillips, slot corner, going to the Jaguars. Perfect fit for him. They need a slot corner. Julius Brent, 6'3", big, lengthy corner to the Giants, which they really need. Tyreek Stevenson, maybe not ready to start day one, but you got Trayvon Diggs, you got Stephon Gilmore. He can sit there, he can learn, he can develop. You can put him in situations to succeed early in his career and help him reach that ceiling, which I think a lot of teams see as being quite high. Then you got Antonio Johnson, play safety, play in the slot. Perfect for Buffalo, especially with an aging safety group. They did bring back Jordan Poyer, but they're still aging out there, so you can put him in sort of same thing with Tyreek Stevenson, put him in a position to succeed early. And then you got DJ Turner, Cincinnati. Keep replenishing that as they're going to likely lose either Awuzie or Hilton, or maybe both in the offseason, because they got them both on front-loaded deals when they signed them, and now they're on the back end last year of it. So that cap hit's going to be much higher next year if they decide to keep them, and they need to think about paying Burrow, Higgins, and Chase. And then it ends with a run on defensive linemen. Tuli Tuipulotu, hybrid edge interior guy. I think that's perfect for Chicago because, like I said, with the earlier pick, they don't really have anyone to play that role that you would look at and be like, that's for sure a day one starter for the whole season. So it allows them to sort of put him in positions to succeed. Maybe they play a little big on early downs with him at a defensive end position and then kick him inside on those third downs. Isaiah Foskey, edge. Again, he can work in there slowly because they do have a lot of depth there, but it's aging depth. And they can move on from a lot of guys. Keeping a strength to strength, they always like to have a lot of depth anyway on the defensive line in Philly. And then Siaki Ika, big, gnarly nose tackle space eater, allows Chris Jones to be a little bit more of a risk taker, even on early downs. They can play big and have Chris Jones at defensive end without sacrificing in the center because Siaki Ika just lines up in a 0 or 1 technique and just will eat 2 blockers every single time. And there it is, 64 picks. What do you think about what I did with Jalen Carter? Houston Texans fans, you must really love me. Come on. You gotta love me now. You absolutely have to love me. You guys, you're welcome. You're welcome. I should be your GM. You're right. I should. But make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment in the comment section what your thoughts are for what I did for your team in particular. And thumbs up the video. Even if you hated it, just because it helps out with the algorithm. Lets more people see it in the draft, mock draft community of viewers and makers and whatever. Thanks.